Great. Thanks. I'm really thrilled to be here today. I'm Josh Greenberg, excuse me, a program director at the Sloan Foundation. And I figure my goal today is twofold: to talk a little bit about how we're thinking about things at Sloan, and to perform a little bit of a sort of the way funders think about the world and see the world. Very much looking forward to the conversation. Um, So I'll put the mission statement of the foundation up. I'm not going to read it, but while you look at it, for those not familiar with Sloan, we're primarily a science research funding foundation. We've been around since the 1930s, mainly focus on funding research in the natural, non-biomedical, life, and social sciences. A good bit more than half the foundation's grant making goes directly to the kind of question-driven or disciplinary research projects that you'd expect to see funded by the NSF or the NIH, or the now various national research funding organizations. We also have a set of programs that think more broadly about the context in which science is done. We have a public understanding of science program. We have a higher education program that is particularly focused on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I, with Liz Vu, who's on the call, handled the technology grants portfolio. The tech portfolio has been around for about 12 years. Our particular goal is to focus on the production and dissemination of scientific knowledge through technological innovation. We're really focused on the how of research and the ways that that technology is mobilized in the service of research. These days, our work is largely divided into two big buckets. One focused on the role of software in science, where we have a set of interests. We also have an exploratory program where we've been trying to we've been able to do a little bit more opportunistic and exploratory grant making around the topics like open hardware, or trust and algorithmic knowledge, or more recently thinking more and more about the role of collaboration in science, and particularly the role of virtual platforms or communication platforms in facilitating it. Our grants tend to run 1 to 3 years in duration. We make about 30 to 40 grants a year, and get to be relatively agile. I tend to think that part of the role of a medium-sized foundation like Sloan is to take more risks, to provide earlier support out in advance of clear signals of either demand or impact, and complement the work that's being done by other particularly larger funders. Speaking of, I wanted to take a second and just talk broadly about, because I don't think we necessarily do this enough in philanthropy. Talk about what are the pressures we're under, what are the incentives we have. So first, like I said, we tend to be particularly thinking about where our dollars can be uniquely useful. That means we try to pay attention to things that are critically ignored elsewhere. These days, thinking a lot about issues like community health, maintenance, infrastructure. Something like technical debt is something we're thinking more and more about, and these things that are often overlooked. We like to think of ourselves as trying to valorize the topics and issues that need more attention. One of the other things is, because we can be relatively agile, we move in and out of spaces in some ways relatively quickly, particularly in response to other larger funders. Once an area of focus has become more normalized, has become more mainstream, we start to think about what are the next challenges we should be looking at. Something else, and I think this is very germane to the conversation today. We tend to have a default to be forward-looking, even when we're doing sort of post hoc evaluations of either individual grants or larger efforts. It's usually to inform future grant making. We actually at Sloan don't have a robust evaluation team. Often we'll either make grants or contract to people who are doing evaluations from the outside. But we often very much think about developmental or formative kinds of evaluation. And to be totally honest, have never really allocated capacity to to necessarily do everything we could, looking sort of backwards at trying to distill best practices and lessons out of the work we do. In terms of accountability, we're accountable to ourselves. We actually have internal structures that make sure various programs are engaged in each other's work. We think of ourselves as, obviously, we have a board of directors. We're accountable to them, and often they're the ones who are asking for evidence of impact to continue investments or grow areas. But we also very much think of ourselves as accountable to the public. We're a private philanthropy. It's not directly tax dollars that we're spending, but we are implicitly subsidized by the public, and we try to. One of the ways we really try to take that seriously is by following our grantees and where they see value. I think we try to be a little bit like not think that we have all the answers, but particularly look for signals of value and impact from others. And the last thing, I'll come back around to this, is I think, like every funder, it's easy to, there are certain measures that are easy to get access to. We're continually trying to figure out how to do better, how to push beyond the sort of low-hanging fruit of measurement, and at times have had to fund projects. I think of the work that ways we've been supporting CSCCE, the ways we've been supporting the Chaos Project, others who are thinking about, measures. There are times that when those measures aren't ready at hand, we kind of need to help build that infrastructure so that others can use it as well as us. So we think of our work as falling into three main buckets, and I'm going to talk specifically about the technology program. And I think this largely maps to the foundation more generally. Really, virtually every grant we have is primarily either focused on funding people or institutions or technology. Each of these grants has a different flavor, has a different set of things we look for in a grant opportunity, and certain things we look for when we think about, was this grant successful? And the thing that I want to, if there's one point I want to make today, it's that we've gotten to a point, I think, over time, where we've come to understand community as a strategy, both for the impact of a given grant, but also the sustainability of that work beyond the funding period of a particular grant. The technology program has historically been the program that thinks about the process of community, I think particularly because a lot of it's been coupled with existing and emerging communication technologies. We've been the ones who are thinking about social media, who are thinking about Slack, who are thinking about the various platforms that mediate a lot of community work. So I think we were the ones who were first thinking about that, and we've sort of become internal resources to our colleagues across other programs when they're thinking about how to build community among a particular set of researchers or a particular set of practitioners. So for us, I think we came to understand increasing engagement and access, as well as gaining diversity of perspective into the research process, not as ends themselves. Like community, it is valuable to have community, I think, but also as a way to think about sustainability, a way to think about, I think we worry a lot about when we end our funding, what will the legacy of that funding be? Will the things we fund just go away after the fact? Particularly as we're thinking about funding people, institutions, technology, and community. In some ways, I'm very conscious of what Lou said earlier, and I don't want to treat it as a silver bullet. But I think community can be a really compelling exit strategy for a given funder, and that can sound really good and really appealing, but it's also a very dangerous thing to say, because it can feel like if you tick that box and you say, "Oh, we have a network," then you're all set, and you don't have to do the hard work of building and really getting a community to that kind of escape velocity where it can be, a key driver of ongoing work and sustainability along the axes of whatever a grant is trying to do. I also should say, in addition to thinking about sustainability, community, the existence of a community metrics can actually be incredibly valuable to funders to help us, as I said before, to be accountable and to figure out where we're steering our resources. We largely are driven by who we talk to and the various sort of sources of inbound signal we have. And when there's a more mature community in an area of practice, that becomes an incredibly valuable resource, an incredibly valuable tool for somebody in a funding role. So let me really quickly, I only want to take a couple more minutes. I just want to really quickly look at each of those three contexts, people, institutions, and technology, just to say something about the kinds of metrics, the kinds of things we've evolved towards thinking about to try to get past that low-hanging fruit. I mean, for people in community, a lot of the work we do is to grow the ranks of new professional roles. We've thought a lot about, these days we're thinking a lot about data scientists and research software engineers. We think a lot about community management or managers. And we see community as a really necessary component of professional identity and career durability. If you're gonna try to put people into roles that that maybe historically have been marginalized or haven't been sort of recognized as critical contributors to research, or sort of side budget lines as opposed to the main work that happens. I think it's incredibly important to be able to connect those folks in a community, to build a sense of shared purpose. That's something we've seen in different contexts. When we look at success metrics, I think for a community of people, I mean, we're trying to think more and more about attrition. How do you make sure that people are showing up and continuing to show up over a period of time, that they're finding value in that community? In a complementary sense, I think we can talk about, like, it's in some ways easy to talk about growth of a community, but I like thinking about it in a different frame and thinking about insularity and like reducing insularity. How do you see signals of insularity going down over time? That can be who's showing up from a diverse range of institutions, who's showing up from different perspectives, and I think that I don't know how to phrase it other than a sort of as a negative, but like, you know, not insularity it seems compelling, and also the dissemination of sort of shared norms over time through that community. When we think about institutions, on one hand, an institution is a community bounded by the boundaries of its organizational structure. So we've been trying to think more and more about community within institutions, and then also community among institutions. Within an institution, the single biggest metric of success is the institutionalization of the support for that community, the transition from needing external dollars to support a thing to actually reallocating or reprioritizing internally to make that thing continue onward beyond a particular grant. Similar to the point about people within the microcosm of the institution, increased reach seems particularly important. And we're seeing that there are a bunch of logos. We've been thinking a lot about open source program offices as an instantiation of a particular kind of community in universities. And I think we're very much watching right now as they start to grow and increase their reach within their given institutions. And then also thinking about the networking of those institutions. Usually we're not just funding something at one institution, we're funding a kind of thing at a number of institutions. And so there's almost a meta level of community connecting the people who are driving each of those efforts locally. The last area is around technology. We do fund a lot of technology, particularly software, hence the parenthetical. We tend to fund a little bit deeper in the dependency stack. So we're not funding a particular code base that one lab is using, but the kinds of things that become infrastructural or useful to others. I'm sure Karthik will say more about this, so I'll be brief here and just say, I think increasingly when we think about funding a piece of software, in the metrics that we're developing with the grantee or for a given grant, because we develop metrics bespoke for each grant we make, we're thinking more and more about things like, you know, how brittle is the project? How dependent is it on a single maintainer? How resilient is it to changes in personnel? How is there growth in numbers of new contributors, similar to what I said before, not just sheer numbers, but also diversity of those new contributors, and really that diversification of contributor expertise. We're thinking more and more about, you know, rather than thinking generically about, oh, here's a person with a GitHub account who's made a commit, like what are the different kinds of expertise that are being contributed? Are people thinking about, you know, new features versus refactoring? Are they thinking about UX? Are they thinking about documentation? All these different kinds of contribution. So that's a little bit of just a glimpse of how we're thinking about things. I'm looking forward to questions and talking more. But for now, I'll just throw up the link to our newsletter, which we would love to stay in touch, and we try to do a good job of documenting what we're doing, and my and Liz's email addresses. And I think I'll leave it there.